Okay, so when you need to interact through some mediated channel, the very important thing to do is to plan ahead when possible. If you're needing to get information, if you're needing to share information, you want it to be clear and thorough in that messaging space. Remember, without message richness, we're getting a lot less context clues and nonverbal messaging, and so we're not able to read the messages quite as clearly. So you want to be very thoughtful as you approach mediated messaging. You want to know your goal. You want to be clear about that goal. And I'll give you an example here in a moment of what that should look like in an email. But you want to make sure that you're communicating why you're reaching out. Okay. And you should do that early. You want to use appropriate email or phone etiquette, whatever the platform is. You want to still make sure that you're using official titles, still try to use grammar, punctuation. I know that that's a whole thing divided by generations, but if it's in a professional setting, still adhere to those no matter what platform you're using. I don't, even if it's, one of the other social media work spaces that are used as well. Ask and use the preferred title and name. So whatever they go by or whatever you hear other people, if they say, please call me, whatever, go ahead and use that. And be prepared before you even start writing. Follow your conversation structure. So we're going to talk about conversation structure later today, but you're doing it with a professional flair, right? You're not face to face. There's not immediate feedback. And so you need to make sure that you're hitting all of the points that they need to know so that they can address it. And one of the things that's really important is to read emails completely as well. It's too often I will send an email that will ask about 4 different things, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And someone's replying with just the answer to the first thing, or maybe the first and second thing. I know 8 seconds is hard to move past, but that's why you take your 8 seconds, pay attention, take a breather, take another 8 seconds, right? Continue to come back to whatever you're doing and make sure you've answered everything in its entirety. Very important because that just means they're gonna have to email again or send you another message. And you want to make sure that you're answering everything that they've asked at one time. And then you want to follow up, right? So consider timing. If you send an email, depending on, of course, there might be a specific thing that says, you have a deadline today or tomorrow. So that's part of the timing that you have to consider. But if you're sending an email to anyone in the professional realm, whether that is to a professor or to a boss, you should give them, if it's not urgent, you should give them about 24 to 48 hours to respond before you're resending things, right? Give them time to work through their inbox. They may be in meetings, they may have functions, whatever's going on. Give them 24 to 48 hours. And then if after 48 hours you have not heard from them, go ahead and resend it and say, hey, I just wanted to check back in about the information that you can see below, right? So let me give you an example of what this should look like. So in a subject line for email, you want to make sure that you're specific. Don't just say hi or anything like that. First of all, that's a red flag, right? Every single organization has to think about phishing and scams right now. So you want to make sure that's a real subject line that you put in there. So be very clear about what you're emailing about, fundraising project. Use an appropriate greeting and title. So good morning, good afternoon, hello, dear, whomever, and use their official title, Mr., Mrs., Dr., Professor, David, whatever they want to go by, right? Immediately tell them why you're reaching out, right? Be very specific. I'm emailing to determine our budget for the upcoming fundraising project, right? So now they know I'm thinking about budget for this, and then you can be more specific about the things that you need. Avoid qualifiers. This is a key for you, and we'll talk some more about this as we move through the sessions, but power in language is critical. And so you don't want to take away your power the same way you don't want to be disrespectful to someone else's, right? So make sure you're not using things like if I were to rephrase that and say, hey, I really am needing some of this information whenever you get a chance. I could use some information about the budget. First of all, you've convoluted the message and you've taken away the power of what you need, right? Make it feel like it has the appropriate amount of urgency by being clear and leaving out some of those qualifiers. So again, you want to just elaborate on whatever that is that you might need, right? I have the example here. Can you let me know if you received this project plan last Monday? I need to finalize it before I leave for the weekend. So you're reminding them of your timeline. You're being clear about what your deadlines are. That way they know what they need to prioritize as well. And that could go on, right? Like the why you need, that could be 3 or 4 things that needs to be replied to. So when you're receiving an email or sending an email, make sure you attend to every piece of the message and not just the first request. Some people might email that back and say, yes, I received it. And they're like, do nothing else with it, right? So make sure that you're clear about what the next step is. And then you want to use an appropriate closing with your full name and any relevant info, right? If you're working in a small organization and you're the only David on the lot and there's 3 of you, you could probably just say, thanks, comma, David, right? But that's not how you want to start when you're new to an organization, right? Until people get more familiar with you. And like if I'm sending an email out across campus, I can't just put my first name because some people don't know me. Some people are going to confuse me with Dr. Boma. We are name twins. We have the same first name and almost the same last name. So you got to be very clear about who you are. So you want to put an appropriate ending, sincerely, have a great afternoon, best wishes, whatever that appropriate structure is, along with your name. If you're a student and you're sending to a professor, probably a good idea to go ahead and put your buff ID just in your signature line, because if there's ever anything they have to look up, the buff ID helps tremendously. But obviously, if there's anything else, a title in an organization or whatever, that could be helpful as well. So what I'd like for you guys to do, I'm going to have Laura put you guys into partners this time, so maybe just 2 in a room. I would like for you to discuss what types of mediated communication is used in your organization. So whomever you are partnering with, what have you found that organization is using? Maybe they're using Slack, maybe they have a really crazy GroupMe, maybe they're just using email, and maybe sometimes your boss is texting you, right? And so there's these blurred lines sometimes about professional spaces of communication and personal, and that it can be on the same device, which can create some other problems. So I want you to talk about what you're using in your organization, how a text message might differ from an email, and then in what ways your organization uses social media or how you use it. Are you friends with your boss on social media, right? That kind of thing. Are you friends with colleagues, friends on social media? So you'll be in partners, so maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and I'll let Laura put you guys into groups of 2, maybe 3 if there's, just smaller groups at a time.
And then, Dr. Baum, when they think of organization, are we thinking of their service site or AmeriCorps itself? Or maybe
either or both.
Okay, I'm going to send everybody and then I'll put that question into the rooms.
All right. So welcome back. I am curious to hear very quickly, you can either speak it or you can put it in the chat. What types of mediated communication are you using in your service organizations and or with AmeriCorps? Like what are you, obviously email, we can say that's probably a given. And what else might you be using? Email and text, okay. Wow, that's a lot of things. Will, I'm very curious where your organization is. Are you
Wildcat Bluff?
Wildcats, are you doing social media management?
I am for like Wildcat Bluff.
Right.
Or rather, I am in collaboration with like the new kind of social media person that the Discovery Center has.
Okay.
And so like I take media and send it to them. But yeah, it's just kind of complicated. We got a lot going on, and it's definitely hard to keep track of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So here are some of the potential problems that I'm seeing come up that you just have to be very thoughtful about, right? And I'm in the same category with some things. So like if you are doing social media management, unless you have different devices that you are using for both your personal space and your professional space, you have to be absolutely adamant that you are double checking how and when you're sharing information, right? As the director of Atterbury Honors, I have personal Instagram, and then I'm also the manager of our Instagram account. And it's very simple. When I'm in Instagram, I just switch profiles really quickly and share something, right? So I'm unlikely to share anything too crazy on even my personal account, right? But you still have to be very thoughtful about where you're putting this information, and you have to be very careful that what is meant for a professional space, or rather what's meant for your personal space, is not coming out through that professional list, right? So you got to be very careful with that. Email, texting, all of those things should stay fairly formal, and we were talking about grammar and all of those things, at least initially in a professional setting. You want to be as professional as you can. You have to think about culturally working with different generations. And while a 60-year-old individual may be texting you out of convenience or communicating at an event with you, they may not know all of the slang and all of the shortcuts that are being used or referred to. So make sure that you spell things out, use proper sentence structure, and that kind of thing when you're doing that. And of course, as you become more familiar with someone, you can pull back on all of those formalities sometimes, right? I don't actually text Dr. Terry as the provost of our university, right? But even if I were, I would never pull back the formalities with the provost, right? However, if I'm working with a colleague and I'm like, hey, I'm having an issue, can you come help me with this real quick? I might text them, no problem, right? On working on a class thing or something. So you have to be thoughtful about with whom you are speaking and communicating, and just always aim for the formality first, and then you can bring that back as you move through. Oops. Okay, everybody still see the PowerPoint? All right, so here are the things that, oh, you can't see the PowerPoint? Can
I
you
may
hear
have
me?
the wrong view, but I don't see it. Hold on.
You can see the PowerPoint currently, it's up.
You can? Okay, good job. I can't.
Okay, it should say what to do, should be what you see there. So if you're not seeing that, let me know. But there are some things that you can do to improve all of this, and to look at before we meet the next time. So number one, I want you guys to audit your social media platforms, right? Make sure that your name is clear, that you're easily identifiable. Make sure that your profile picture and your cover photo or background photo or whatever on some of those spaces is also appropriate. You want to go through your page. Now, obviously, like I've been on Facebook forever, like 2007. I'm not going to scroll through almost 20 years worth of information. But if you know that there's something out there that you posted when you were 13, go back and try to do some search or try to find some of those things to make sure that there's not anything in it. I know that it's not fair to hold a 13-year-old accountable because their frontal lobes are not developed yet. But it could still come up and you could still be held accountable, even if it's just not getting a job that you want, right? So you want to be very careful about everything on your feed, everything on your page, and what you're saying. Look at the reviews that you've made that are public. Look at the messaging systems that you've created. It doesn't mean that you can't leave a review that is negative because something was really poorly done and you're just trying to communicate that information. But how did you do it, right? So we'll talk about wording with conflict and that kind of thing at our next session. But right now, just take a quick audit. And then also review the time that you spend on these places. How much time are you scrolling on TikTok or Instagram or communicating on Snapchat or whatever, right? Think about how much time you're dedicating your life, because the reality is wherever you put your time, that is also where you put your value. And I'm going to ask you about your values here in just a little bit. And so be thinking about how much time you dedicate. One of the things that you can do if you feel like, wow, I really need to cut back a little bit, is that you can set timers for access to your information. You can set do not disturbs, and all of those things can be remediated if there's an emergency call, of course. But it will help you not get notifications after 10 p.m. or whatever that might be. Oh, that was an admit on here. Is that for you? Okay. And then You can review notifications too. So if you feel like you're constantly being inundated by the vibration, by the ding, by whatever it is, you can change what those notifications are. Go look through all of the notifications. You can say, like, I don't, most of my apps, I turned off all of my news apps, right? So I'm not getting breaking news information all the time. That wasn't really breaking news anymore. It was just constant push of headlines. And I've turned those off so that when I want to read the news, I can go into my app and I can control what I'm consuming. So make sure that you're setting those notifications on the things that you no longer want to have constantly berating you with information, right? Because remember, 8 seconds, that's why, because there's always something trying to demand our attention. I want you to be thoughtful about separating connection from distraction. And so when you are having conversations with individuals, if you're in a meeting, set some ground rules for yourself that you're going to put your phone maybe face down, right? You're turning notifications off, that you're going to put it all the way down in a bag so it would be harder for you to pull out. If you're having a conversation with someone, and let's say this example arises sometimes, and you need to have a conversation face to face, even if it's just a friend for coffee, and you're in the middle of something, you can say, give me just a second, I have to send this email. And then once you do, put it away, right? So be clear about what you're doing, that you're not trying to devalue them, that something has to be finished, and then you'll put it away. So be very thoughtful about separating those two. It can be very difficult if you're a student. Certainly you've sat around with your friends, or even as a parent, I've done this too, right? Where I'm like talking to my kid about their day at school, and I'm also answering emails, and I'm very distracted. And that is a detriment if we do it too often and too long. So be careful about that. And then the other thing I want you guys to do is to practice mindfulness. And this takes a little bit of play for yourself on how you can best develop it. So I talked about ways to develop better communication skills and adaptability. And I talked about even going to the theater and even reading. But what can really help us, and with that attention piece, is practicing mindfulness. And that means really setting everything else aside and giving yourself time to literally just exist, to breathe, to meditate. If you're religious, maybe it's prayer time. Maybe it's listening to instrumental music. Maybe it's stretching. Maybe it's going for a jog. Maybe it's laying down in a dark room. But literally removing those distractions, especially technological distractions, completely away from you, and giving yourself time to do anything else quietly, right? So it's hard to do because of our attention and our constant need for knowing, right? We have FOMO about everything. I'm going to miss the breaking headline of NFL news if I don't have my phone, right? So it requires starting small, like 5 to 10 minutes a day. And if you were to start doing that for a week and then moved it up a little bit the next week, if you can move it into where you're giving yourself 30 minutes of mindfulness a day, that would go so far in your ability to connect, to communicate, to pick up and understand nonverbal communication. We'll talk more about nonverbal also in these sessions. But it helps you be more observant and more attentive. And so all of those can be incredibly valuable to you if you start to practice it now. So start small. You want to set the space, whatever that looks like. Like I said, it might be playing with it for you. It might just be sitting there in quiet. It might be turning off lights. It might be listening to instrumental music, whatever that is. Maybe you're sketching and drawing and whatever, right, while you're doing it. But find what works for you and then slowly increase the time. And that will likely improve your ability to connect, to communicate, to critically think, and to be attentive in lots of spaces. And so that's a challenge for all of y'all, is to work on building mindfulness, even if it's just for 5 minutes a day. Do y'all have any questions about mindfulness or any of those things? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the self as well, like I said, and a little bit about collaborative communication too. So Aristotle says, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And the reason I chose that quote is because it's very difficult to connect to others if you yourself do not understand your strengths, your communication styles, or any of those things. So I'm gonna have, unless you've changed it, am I able to put them in groups now? I don't think so.
Maybe, can you do it as
Maybe.
the host?
Post tools.
I'll do it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna have you guys go back into small groups again. And in the
Pairs or 4 to 6?
yeah, like
bigger
3,
groups.
4, 5, somewhere in there. And I just want you guys to talk about these 3 terms and just without using any external resources, how would you define them? How would you define self-concept? How would you define self-esteem? And how would you define self-worth? And so I want you to just take a moment with your group. We'll give you guys about 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes to talk about those 3 words: self-concept, self-esteem, and self-worth. There we go. Just to save a little bit of time, I'm just going to kind of share the general understanding of what each of these are. And so they're very related and interconnected, and probably you had some of those conversations. But self-concept is how you view yourself, right? It is your honest perspective when you try to think about who you are, what you value, what you can and can't do. That is your self-concept, right? Your self-esteem is your attitude towards that identity. So your self-concept is how you truly view yourself. And then your self-esteem is what your attitude is towards that perspective. So if I view myself as an athlete, right, then my attitude towards that could be positive or negative. It could be positive because I think I'm physically capable. There's a talent maybe there. It could also be negative that maybe I'm not the athlete I wish I could be or that I would like to be. And so that self-esteem could be negative or positive or neutral. It could be, it's what it is. Like my self-concept is that I have brown eyes and it is what it is, right? Not any perspective there. Self-worth is what you allow yourself to be subjected to by external forces, right? And so if you feel like you have a higher self-esteem, you're likely going to have a higher self-worth, right? And if you have a lower self-esteem, then you're going to feel like you're not as valued and you shouldn't, you're like, oh, I'm lucky to be in this situation. I'm lucky to have this job. I'm lucky to have this relationship. And so it's very important to understand how you perceive yourself and what's important to you. And so I'm going to bring up Minty again. So if you have access, get back to minty.com. And the question now is, it's to write some lists. Are you still seeing the screen? I hope, Minty. I made it bigger. I made the participants bigger on my side. Okay, so I want you to write a list of the following. It'll be anonymous. We won't know who's putting what here, but I want you to do your top 5 identity traits. So 5 things that are like, this is definitely who I am. And that can be lots of things, right? I could say I'm a mother because it's a huge part of my life. I could say I'm a football fan, right? That's also a big part of my life. I could say I'm a singer. I'm not a singer, but some of you may be. And so whatever you think are the top 5 things about yourself, which could be relationship, it could be that you're tall, could be a physical attribute, it could be a skill or a talent or an interest. So 5 things about you, and your top 5 things are that are most important to you. That could be anything. Maybe TikTok is one of your top 5 things. Maybe your job, maybe success, your grades, your family, whatever it is. Top 5 things of your identity, top 5 of importance. So if you'll create that list and then if you'll share it on minty.com for us, right? As we get more responses coming in. This gives us a couple of things. This helps us, first of all, understand with whom we're connecting to, right? This leaves everybody with some autonomy. It gives everyone an equal platform without outing anyone specifically about anything, right? Whatever's important to you, what's your value, how you identify with anything. But it's letting us know also as a collective community the variations that we have in our spaces, right? And so this is an important tool that you can use in any kind of like team building or any kind of like get to know you, introductory things, training sessions, things that can help people find ways to connect to others while feeling that element of safety, right? And so because of it's all anonymous. You can also, you could do either one of these. You could say like, what's a strength of a company? What's your strength? There's so many things that you could do and set up here. And so, okay, I love this here. We got the traits, and then we have things that are most important. And so what's important there is as you're evaluating what you value, is that where you're spending your time? That is my question for you. Is that how you're spending your time? Is that how you're using the tools that you have? Or is it an opportunity for you to grow in that space and to find new tools to help you meet those needs or to serve the values that are most important to you? So these are great. Keep them coming. I'm going to shift the space here just a little bit. I hope maybe. Does everybody see the PowerPoint now? Back to here. Okay, so if you're still posting, go ahead and do that. But I want to talk a little bit about self-concept and how that's developed. Because remember, that's the foundational piece, is understanding who we are and how we see ourselves. And so the very first thing that we do to develop our self-concept is it's from reflected appraisal. It's called Cooley's reflected appraisal. And that means that things are reflected back to us of traits and of identities and of values and things that we have. So people might say something about your physical appearance, like you have beautiful eyes. Maybe you hear that all the time, and that becomes part of your self-concept. Like, I guess I have good eyes, and your self-esteem can go up with that too. And then even your worth, right? Like, my eyes are too pretty. I ain't staying in this nonsense here, right? I deserve better than this in a relationship. I have pretty eyes. I'm just kidding. But that's a very loose way of how those things can be developed. And so early on, before we're 5 years old, our whatever our family dynamic structure looks like, whoever our guardians are, whoever's taking care of us, our caretakers, and media are the two largest influences there, because we're watching cartoons, we're watching Sesame Street, we're watching, well, y'all aren't probably, nobody's watching Sesame Street anymore, but you know what I mean, right? Like there are media representations like Bluey, and if a kid sees themselves in Bluey, they're going to start to identify some of those self-concept elements. It's reflected back to them, right? And similar to adults, right? If we see whatever my identity is, you just told me what your identity was, right? And if I am a person of faith, and how is that person of faith represented in media, then that's reflected back to me sometimes. So, so however we identify can be reflected to us through the media and by our caretakers. Before we're 5, that's the largest part. After we're 5, then our peers become the largest influence. Our friends, people that we're around, and the things that they say to us. It's also developed sometimes based on social comparison groups. So you have those values. What is important to you? It is important to you to be kind, right? And so then you think about your social comparison. Who is the kindest person you know? And have you reached that level, or is there still room to grow, right? So our self-concept can be about meeting the same level that our social comparison is at, whoever that is, right? So say if I want to play basketball and I want to be like LeBron James, that's my social comparison. I'm never going to be LeBron James, right? I'm going to be eternally disappointed. But it's important to have those realistic talks with yourself about if your expectations can match your identity and your values, right? Self-concept is also not always what others think of us. Someone might think you're very intelligent, you're very smart. Maybe they think you're very funny, but maybe you don't think that for yourself, and so it doesn't always match that reflection. But it is the most commonly influenced space, is that reflection. It's also malleable, which means it can change, and it does change, right? Based on our experiences, based on new reflections, and based on our new values as we develop, as our brains develop, as we go through life, our values change. And so how we feel like we're meeting those values can change in our self-concept. And so this is called adaptability. However, we sometimes seek that cognitive conservatism, which sounds like a mouthful, but all that really means is that we look for proof that we're right about how we think about ourselves, right? You may do well in school. You may have good grades. You may be successful in some specific field, right? That you're doing a good job, but you don't think you're doing a good enough job. And you make one mistake and you say, see, I knew that this wasn't for me, right? And so we have to be careful about the lies that experience can tell us sometimes, and go back to your original self-concept and know what you're capable of, who you are, and what you value and what you're reaching towards. It definitely determines our perspective of our abilities and our grit. The higher our self-esteem, the more likely we are to persevere when challenges arise. And so the first step you can do to developing grit, which people say, I don't know how you develop grit. Well, one of the things is you have a realistic expectation, right? If my expectation is to be like LeBron James and I work so hard and I can never dunk the ball, I'm going to get, defeated pretty quickly. And I'm going to give up and I'm not going to have grit because I'm never going to dunk a basketball, right? So having realistic expectations is very important into maintaining that self-esteem and being able to persevere and to have grit to continue. I have a QR code here now. And so if everyone can or will scan that. So there's two ways to do this. If you are on a separate screen like I am, I have a phone separate from my computer screen, you can pull up your camera function and you can scan it and you'll get a link that pops up and will take you to a True Colors survey. The second thing that you can do if you are on your phone is you can screenshot the QR code and then open it back up in your photos and then hold the QR code with your finger, like touch the QR code, and a link should pop up. So that's two ways that you should be able to open that. And if that doesn't work, I also have this very long link that you can type in if you want to, but hopefully you're able to do it otherwise. So let me give you the QR code. And then we're going to take like a 5 or 6 minute break. I'm going to let you guys turn off your video, audio, and complete this True Colors worksheet. So I want you to take a few moments, take a little break. You should be able to complete this. If you're not being able to pull it up, you could probably just put it in your internet browser, True Colors quiz, and you should be able to find a similar one. So QR code, let me end this show, and I will also just put this link in the chat. And so hopefully that will help if you're still looking to access it. So let's say 5 minutes. We'll start with 5 minutes. As you're done, in 5 or 6 minutes, come back. Whether you're done or not, go ahead and come back and come back to the video. Okay, for those of you who can hear me, if you will, go ahead and start turning your cameras back on and returning. Hopefully you've had plenty of time to complete the True Colors. And if not, you can continue to just finish that up and tally those. I think we'll save this discussion for our next meeting because there's a couple more things I want to talk about today, but it's things that you can be thinking about right now as you're coming back and thinking about your True Colors. You should have found one that was higher than the others, and they're ranked, right? None of us are one color all the time, but True Colors is just kind of a fun metaphor for understanding what some of our personality styles might be and our communication styles might be. And this can also be very helpful in working in family dynamics, in professional situations, in relational spaces, roommates, those kinds of things, just to understand why someone might behave or participate in things in a certain way. So like I said, we'll do some of this discussion for our next time because we'll also be talking about conflict. But thinking about your true color, what does your color say about your self-esteem? So on the space where you were just completing it, it has all of these, and I have them on here for your reference as well. You can look at some of these colors and be like, okay, an orange is dynamic and they're animated, and so they're probably a little bit more extroverted. They probably have a little bit higher of a self-esteem, right? You could look at gold and be like, okay, well, their self-concept and their self-esteem might be valued through academic successes or through organization and structure. And so none of these are a wrong way to be, right? They all have their own benefits. And you'll also might be able to see how your values are connected directly to this, right? So I am a blue. My strongest color is a blue, which is no surprise. I teach interpersonal communication, right? So relationships and family are very important to me. And so it makes sense that that would be my color with those values, right? And then for each one of you, I want you to really think about what are some of the benefits of your color, right? Your personality style, your communication style in communication settings, when you're connecting with other people, when you're working one-on-one in an interpersonal situation, or when you're in a group setting or a professional setting. In what ways does your color help you or create challenges, right? So there are benefits to it. So because I am blue, I'm a very good listener. And so I might be very observant and I might be listening a lot. And someone might mistake that as being upset, right? I'm not contributing as much to the conversation because I'm listening. And so that could be a challenge based on my color. And so you can take a screenshot of these. I think you'll have access to these slides afterwards, but know that we'll be talking about these things when we come back. So really contemplate before our next session about your color and how that impacts your communication with others as we go through this. Are there any questions about this?
Would you say these change based on roles we're in or attitudes we have as we do it, or kind of how?
Yeah, so it's possible, right? So context and experience. Experience is the largest thing that can create change. Things that, you might have been in high school and you might not have been very organized. And then as your values shifted, right, and maybe education became very important to you, or academic success, maybe you became more organized, you became a little bit more goals. So that experience and that maturity can shift. I will say that I have taken this exam, this test several times over the last 20 years, and I've always been blue. So I'm blue, green, and that's never changed. So I'm very interpersonal, relationship focused, and then I'm analytical. And so those two things have never shifted for me personally. But it is possible that depending on that personality style, introvert, extrovert, that you might be much more animated in some spaces and other spaces. So it might be a little bit more orange in a safe space. If you're a young person, at college, you might be gold and you're structured and you're taking care of things. And then like you go home for spring break and I am tired and mom's going to take care of it. And I am orange now and I am not doing my laundry and everything's in a pile, right? And so there's different environments that can lead you to be different things, certainly. And so, yes, I would say you can shift, but the core of who you are is going to probably stay the same most of the time. Good question. Other questions? Okay, so we'll revisit this. This will be one of our platform's foundational piece for our next meeting. Can everybody see this slideshow, the next slide with the new quote with Henry Ford? Okay, great, thank you. All right, so Henry Ford says coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is success. And so this is a little bit of a mantra for as we move through. So session 1, we've come together. This is our beginning. We're really just getting some foundational knowledge so that we're able to do some more application later as we go through our sessions. Coming back will be progressing more. And then of course, in the end, hopefully you'll have some important tools for success. So something I want you to know as we go through the next couple of sessions and talk about everything through conflict and challenging conversations, and how to connect and paraphrase and those things, is that there are 2 major keys to communication to have successful ongoing maintenance of relationships, whether they're personal or professional. The first one is empathy, and we'll talk next time about how to build empathy. Mindfulness is one of those key ways to do that, because you're more observant, you're more in tune with other people. But empathy is not being agreeable. Empathy is understanding the other person's perspective or experience or the why behind what they do. And the second one is being other oriented. So you can talk about your own personality style. You can talk about your love language. You can talk about any of these personality things that you want to talk about, Enneagram number. And all that should do is tell other people how to communicate with you, right? And so when you have someone in your circles and you know they're a gold, they maybe aren't as in tune to listening to your fun story from the weekend, right? They want to know when you're going to get this done, how the deadline's going to be met. So the key in communication is to understand where the other person's coming from and to be other oriented. You should change your messaging based on what the receiver needs, right? It's not about you should just understand what I say. It's I need to make sure I present it in a way that the other person can understand it. And so we'll do some of that practicing next time. I know that we're getting short on time here, and so I just want to get some foundations going. Here are the 4 maxims for cooperative communication. Competitive communication is based in authority. It's a power dynamic. In interpersonal relationships, it can actually be a red flag for potential bad situations or abusive situations. And so what we're focusing on today is understanding what cooperative communication is. And there's 4 basic things: quality, quantity, relevancy, and manner. Number 1, quality is about being honest and authentic, right? It's you're sharing information that you believe is accurate. And if you're not, you're clear about that. Like, I think this is what it's supposed to be, but I'm not sure, or I can check that for you. And it's also about presenting who you are authentically, right? And so we are pretty good as humans in reading when someone is not being very authentic to us. It's part of our nonverbal observation. And we suddenly distrust them if we feel like they're hiding anything from us, which can be challenging, right? I have my oldest daughter's on the spectrum, so there's a lot of masking and mimicry that goes on with her. And so it's a little bit challenging for her to come across as fully authentic sometimes if you don't know her very well. So neurodivergence can play with that, but trying to be as authentic as you can be valuable for just gaining the other person's trust, gaining the other person's interest, and being able to build that relationship, whether it's personal or professional. The second one is quantity. You want to make sure that you're addressing what you need to address when you need to address it and not anything else. We've all been in situations where people will go off on a tangent, or they'll be interrupted, right? That 8-second attention span. And I'm trying to tell you something, and you remembered about what you had for lunch and this crazy story, and you're like, oh, I need to tell you this thing real quick, right? And so we will interject sometimes. And that's another place where that mindfulness can help us kind of sit back and say, okay, I can tell them the story later. Right now is not the time. And so you want to make sure that you're not stage hogging, that you're not interjecting, and that you're taking appropriate turn-taking motions and moments in conversation. The other one is relevancy. You want to stay on topic, right? Group projects can be very difficult about this, especially if there's like friend groups in between because they go off on their side conversations. So when you have a goal, you want to be clear about that up front and try to stay focused on that goal. And then manner. So this is using the right tools for whatever your project is, right? The language that you use, the word choice, the diction. I talked about that grammar, the professional tone. It's always best to start higher up. And then as you develop a relationship or get to know someone, you can bring back the formality a little bit as long as it's appropriate. Like I said, if I'm talking to Dr. Terry, the provost, I'm never bringing that formality back, right? It's always going to stay there. It's always going to be at the forefront. But if I'm talking to my program coordinator about what she did this weekend with her kids, that's a little bit more informal, right? And so it's important to recognize these power structures, which we'll talk about some more in the next session, and how that can change what's appropriate, how you say things, how you behave, how you respond, how you listen. And so practicing the appropriate manner in the appropriate space is critical. So quality, quantity, relevancy, and manner are the 4 maxims. All right. So the hardest thing about connecting sometimes is just starting and breaking the ice. And so I want to give you a little bit about small talk. We know that people who are neurodivergent, people who have higher IQ, people who are blue, like me, on the personality spectrum, they're less fans of small talk. And that's okay. Some of you might not like small talk, but it's very important to understand that small talk is the door, right? It's just the door into the conversation, because rarely do people want you to walk up to them and say, let me tell you about this crazy day I had, and just start spilling it out to a person maybe you're just met, right? And so small talk is finding that way in, and there's a few ways to do it. Number 1, it's identifying common ground, which is something that we can all appreciate. It's Friday, right? I'm so glad it's Friday. That's a common ground. Another thing is to commiserate, right? Like, oh, it's so hot outside, or it's so cold, or I can't wait for the weekend. I really need a break, right? So commiserating about something that is not hyper negative, but is understood to be not maybe your favorite thing, right? Finding out more for open-ended questions. This is a great way to break the ice on someone you've met or maybe you haven't spoken with in a while. And you can say, hey, I remember the last time I saw you, you were going for a job interview. Where are you working now, right? So it's open-ended based on the last interaction you had. And then just curiosity. Sometimes giving a compliment or asking someone about themselves is a really good way to connect with them initially and then build that conversation. So there's different ways that you can enter a conversation in greetings. One of them is a question. How are you, right? It's like our most common thing. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Good, how are you? Right? It's a very standard thing that we say, and sometimes don't mean to have more conversation than that, but sometimes you can just ask a real question. A statement about the self, even about you, right? Like, oh man, I've been in this line for so long, I think I might be late, right? It's just something that's happening in your life or in your world. You could do a cute or a flippant statement, right? This is less appropriate in formal settings, but it can be okay in an informal setting. But you want to be careful about using too much of that jokey kind of attitude, especially in a professional setting. Saying something innocuous, which means nobody's going to get mad about it, right? So staying away from like politics and whatever's in the news, sometimes even sports teams, whatever. When you say something innocuous, it's like, wow, it's really nice outside today. It's really warm outside today. It's really hard to argue with those kinds of things, right? And then a direct invitation is sometimes all you really need. It's like, hey, I was about to have lunch. Do you want to join me, right? We're not going to have time to go through our conversation practice this time, but we might open up next time with this. And so I just want you to be thinking about the greeting, the type of greeting you typically use. Most of us have a go-to with everyone we see, right? And that can change, but we usually have a go-to. And so think about how you might change what your greeting would be if you were talking to your boss or to Laura or to a professor or maybe to your grandma, right? Like how would those greetings change a little bit there? Now, after you utilize that greeting, you move into that full conversation structure. So again, the greeting is small talk. It is the entry into conversation, and conversation is the social glue. You cannot build and you cannot maintain relationships if you do not have conversation with people, right? Especially face-to-face, very important. So when you're having conversation, this happens very fast in conversation, but you have a topic priming after you have that entry, which is like, oh yeah, I was going to ask you about that job that you went to. Tell me more about how that interview went, or I'm going to interview there next week. What's it like working there? And then you want to get to the heart of the conversation, which is that fast. Like that switch can be, I remembered you worked at Pentex. Can you tell me what it's like to work there? Because I have an interview there next week. And now we're moved on to the goal of the conversation, right? That's where most of the conversation takes place, is in that heart of the conversation. You're focusing on the goal. But then you're not just like hearing the information and then just walk away. There has to be a closure to the conversation loop, which is usually some kind of reflection on it, evaluating. Like, I'm so glad I ran into you. Thank you for sharing that information. I hear you saying that this is what I should do in the interview. Thank you for that. So paraphrasing a little bit can be important. And then having a very clear, obvious end, which might include, I'll see you next week, right? If you've made future plans to give them that reminder. So this is a lot of information for something that can happen pretty quickly. And so again, this conversation practice is what we might start with in our next session. But before we go, and I'm going to put this in, the link as well in the chat box, another QR code, but this was my homework for you, so to speak. Is this just another assessment for your conflict management style? And so we'll talk a lot about critiquing. We'll talk about constructive criticism. We'll talk about a little bit more about conversation and when things are cooperative versus competitive next time. But it would be great if you would please complete this conflict style assessment. I've put the link in there. Again, when you're doing these kinds of things, try to make it as accessible to people as you can with media, whether it's the QR code, adding the link, maybe sending a follow-up email about how to connect to it later. You want to make sure it's as accessible as possible to people that you are working with. So I have that link in there. I'll just go ahead and do a quick summary. So remember that media is a tool. Learn to use it properly. We'll continue to practice that as we go through our sessions. Understand that the self matters, focusing on what is important to you, realistic expectations, and figuring out the places where you can actually improve, right? I'm never going to dunk a ball. Why am I wasting my time trying to play like LeBron James, right? Understand that connection begins at the beginning. Those small talk, introductory greetings, conversation is key. That's how you build relationships. That's how you get information. That is how you critically complete projects, right? You cannot do anything without conversation, and it's important to build kind of that underlying relationship, however professional or personal that might be. In the next session, we'll continue to talk about improving our usage of media and media tools, talking about a little about self-expression, negative and positive expression, and how that can impact our circles that we're in, and managing challenges. And we will also talk about communication and conflict and cooperative communication as well. So anyways, that is it for me. And if there are any questions, I should have put my information here, but Laura can certainly share that if she'd like. My number, I'm in Fine Arts Complex, 194, 194, I believe. Yes, I'm always confusing it with the one next door. So I'm in 194 in the Fine Arts Complex. If you're in the area, if you're on campus, if you ever want to chat or have questions, and feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat as well if you have anything. Any final thoughts or information or anything that they need to know from you, Laura, before we go?
Not from, no program updates, just the reminders of we're doing this to give you some tools in your toolbox. So hopefully there's some you can take away and use in service or personally and all the things you're doing.
Thank you so much for letting me come in today. I look forward to seeing you guys next month, and I hope you all get a little bit of a break soon. So,
and I had a quick revelation. Put it on your timesheet, log it with AmeriCorps as program training. So that's it.